Hi, guys. Welcome back to Your Inner Spark. My name is Lana, and on this podcast, I like to dive into all of the beautiful and messy components of this human experience. Today, we are joined not only by my dear friend, but somebody who has a multifaceted background. Joining us is Joshua Knox, a fitness and mindset coach who is also the owner of Mycrobloom, a company that is dedicated to providing education and resources surrounding medicinal mushrooms. Welcome, Josh. Thank you for being a part of this conversation with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the intro and the note on a dear friend. We have known each other for a few years now, and I'm really excited and I'm honored to be a part of your podcast.
Yeah, fun little backstory is Josh and I, way back in the day, I don't know, I was probably 18 years old. We worked together for like 1 month at a tanning salon together, and I, I think we caused a lot of
Yeah, we
trouble.
did. I
And
actually forgot about that.
that's how we met. And then
That's hilarious.
a few years
Yeah,
later, I hired him to be my bodybuilding coach, and we've always stayed in contact just via social media. And it's been really fun to watch you really transition and really just blossom. I mean, you've always been somebody that I've looked up to, but I feel like especially over the last few years, our what we're going through is a lot more in alignment now. So I feel like I could pick your brain on so many different topics today. But before we get into any of that, I first have to ask you, Josh, when was the first time you felt your inner spark or that inner pull, that inner spirit that has guided you to the path that you're on today?
yeah. I had an idea that you would ask me this question, and I really thought about it. And I honestly don't have a time period that I have. Like a lot of people have a certain catalyst moment that it kind of shifted for them where they felt God or the universe or something really speaking to them. And for me, since I was a child, I always felt like I had lived multiple lives, even if I didn't believe in that. I was like, and I'd hear it from a lot of adults with the childhood that I lived. I was surrounded by adults and a lot of adults going through abuse and drug use. And they were always like, "How do you already know all this stuff?" So I always felt like I was connected to something outside of myself. But I would say 2018 is when I really 2018 is when I really made a shift in my mental health, and then 2019 was I kind of really started my quote unquote spiritual journey where I began diving deep into my inner work. And so I'm not sure if we consider that your inner spark, but that's definitely what ignited a big change in me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that qualifies. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and maybe it's first start with telling everybody a little bit about what you're currently doing and then your background and how it led you to this path today, how you formed Microbloom, how you ended up in all of these different facets that you're currently in.
Absolutely. So I think anybody that's in a service base like I am, I think once they get to a really good position in their life where they're connecting more to their authentic self, they're almost always speaking to the previous version of themselves. Like their ideal client and the people that they're attracting typically are that they feel most connected to are people that are in a previous state that they were in. So they connect to them the most and they feel the most relatable. And so currently what I'm doing is I'm doing fitness and mindset coaching. I'm now mostly focusing on men. A big thing for me is I want to help men break through mental health, learn how to be more vulnerable, connect more to themselves, and shift themselves not only externally but really starting from their mental to their heart outwards. Eventually, I want to do more with men on a deeper level. And what I mean by that is teaching them how to connect more to their masculine and feminine, how to treat women better, how to be more chivalrous, how to be respectful. I think we have a big disconnection from the men now to 40, 50, 60 years ago and how they showed up as men and the respect they had and the values that they had and how they treated women. And it's a really big thing for me. I think that's over everything, helping women feel safe and teaching men how to do that is probably the most important thing to me. It just takes a while to get to a place where you can be taken seriously in that space. Um, on the other side of that is my company, Mycrobloom, which is a microdosing company that we offer many different resources and products to help people with mental health as an alternative medicine source. And we provide information, education in that space. So, I really am focused on humans. That's what I do. That's what I love. That's what I connect to the most, internally and externally.
Sounds like you're doing the Lord's work out here.
I just actually started going to church 2 weeks ago. So that's been a new, interesting change after being deep into spirituality for the last 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I feel like, I mean, what you said about your clientele being prior versions of yourself, that is just speaking to my soul, because I feel like
Yeah,
my whole mission with this podcast is to speak to little Lanas and to make sure that
yeah,
there's never another little Lana out there that feels alone with anything that she's navigating. It's why I've blasted my entire life out to the public,
yeah.
public universe, because we're all going through these really challenging components of being a human, and then we feel like we're alone in the process. So
Hmm.
I absolutely admire what you're doing at such a deep level. And I know that you've very openly on your social media shared about your struggles with your mental health. Are you comfortable kind of digging into that here and talking about
Oh,
your
of
journey
course.
with your own mental health?
Absolutely. I'm super big, and it works for me. It's sometimes hard for other people, but I'm really big on running straight through the wall of whatever wall you need to break through. Because a lot of people want to chip it and slowly chip it, but it'll slowly build back up, and then they never get through the wall and they get discouraged. And so I'm big on just running right through that wall or that fear. So similar to what you've been going through recently, um, I've pretty much had depression my entire life. Um, and I had two very close suicidal attempts during that time, as well as, most days going to sleep, not wanting to wake up the next day and hoping. And I think there's a common misconception with suicide and depression, because the number one question is, how could you do that to your family? And when you're in that space, you think that you would be doing them a blessing. At least that's how I relate, and many people that I've spoken to, that's how they relate to it, that they're a burden to the people around them, and because of the the way they view themselves. And so I'd be doing them a favor in my eyes. And so around 2018 or 2019, um, the story that I tell, which is how I describe vulnerability, is have you ever seen the movie 8 Mile?
I actually
With
have.
Yeah, so at the end of the movie, the whole time he's going through imposter syndrome, he's struggling to be his authentic self. And at the end, he finally steps into himself and in this rap battle that he's in. And his whole rap is he says everything he views and the people view as bad about him, all of his problems. And he hands the microphone to the guy and he says, now tell them something they don't already know about me. And that's vulnerability to a core. It's saying, this is who I am. I'm accepting all of me, because then you can't take it away from me anymore. You can't take away my power. And that's what people are scared of, vulnerability. If I put myself out there, people won't accept me. When in reality, our traumas are what we're most scared of, we think make us most unique and different. But our traumas is actually what actually connects us to everybody, because we all have traumas. They're part of us. That scar on us is a beautiful story that's created this version of ourselves today. So I was at the gym one day and I was just kind of fed up with it. I wouldn't say I was struggling at the time. I was kind of past it. I was just so sick of being in that space. And I made a video on Facebook and I just put it all out there about it. And I explained depression, and it went viral at the time. And I remember getting a call from like a father figure of mine, a mentor. His name is Andre Scott. He's a big bodybuilding coach in Portland, and he's been an officer for almost 30 years. And he called me and he said, "Your video was the first time I ever understood depression." And he'd been getting mental health training for 30 years as an officer. So me putting myself out there is really what broke through that. And then I remember I hadn't seen people in the fitness community for months, and they'd be like, "How you doing?" And I'd say, "Oh yeah, I like almost committed suicide, but I'm doing great now." Like I would just put it out there like in a light way, because if it's light to me, then I won't build walls and attachments to this thing in my head and make it, heavier than it needs to be.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that with us. And what you said is so exactly true. It's when you own your story, you take your power back. And that's
Hmm.
my whole mission again with this podcast is own your story, own your truth. That's why I have been speaking on topics that I thought I would take to the grave with me, even some that are extremely personal and I probably didn't need to
Yeah.
share, but I'm like, they're cultivating shame for me, which means that they still have power. And I now know through this process that the one way for me to take my power back is to just speak about whatever it is that I'm going through. So I'm sure your video impacted so many people. And I do think that so many people have a misconception around depression. Even my own understanding of
Hmm.
depression is evolving with what I'm currently going through. I've also similarly experienced depression my entire life, probably since I was a child. But I always viewed depression as can't get out of bed, feelings of suicide, just feeling very low. But when I was younger, depression manifested in other
Hmm.
forms, primarily being anger. So I was a very angry teenager. And now, even as an adult, I'm beginning to understand, whoa, depression has impacted me in all these different ways because it doesn't look a certain way for every single person. And for me, what I'm currently going through, a lot of depression, it's like, okay, well, I'm not getting out of bed in the morning. I'm not having any suicidal thoughts, but I'm still very, very depressed. So I think also just as a society as a whole, I think gaining a better understanding of depression and the fact that it really can look different for every single person depending on how it manifests in
Yeah.
your body and your mind. So when did you start when you were very depressed in 2018, what did you start to do to feel better? Did you
Hmm.
seek therapy? Did you go to the doctor? I mean, what did you do to start to feel better?
Yeah, I just wanted to know one thing about where you're at currently, and it's not talked about often, and I think it's one of the hardest phases. It's um, when you're going from the caterpillar to the butterfly, the cocoon phase, where you're not the person you used to be, and you're not yet the person you want to be. It's one of the hardest phases, and it sounds maybe like that's where you're at right now, and that phase is not talked about much at all, and you don't know what to do because you're like, I'm not this one, and I don't know how to be that one yet, and you're releasing all this other stuff and feeling all of that emotion coming up through your nervous system as you're releasing all of it. And it's a very hard stage, and anybody that finally makes the decision to go out of that um, from that caterpillar should be very proud of themselves. So you should be really proud of yourself for doing that.
That gives me goosebumps because I'm like, that is exactly where I'm at. And I use the butterfly analogy so often. It's why I just got a second butterfly tattooed on my arm because I'm like, I feel like this is my 15th metamorphosis, but we're going to keep going through this
Yeah,
process. And I feel like even this week, I'm like, okay, I think I'm about to break out of this cocoon. And so I'm back in this rebuild stage where I'm like, I got to get back into the habits that make me feel good. I know I need all of these things to be a butterfly that can actually go fly and do all the things that I meant to do. I need to get back into the basics, the things that make me feel very good. Because I've
yeah,
been in the darkness for a little while, and it is a really, really messy part of this evolution process. And you're right, it is not talked about enough because we talk about the darkness, like, the really low part, and then we talk a lot about the beauty of once you're out and
yeah.
your wings have been spread, but you can't get to the light without the dark. So
Yeah,
thank you for
people
acknowledging
think
that.
make it seem like it's just a flip, like, oh, I don't want to be that person anymore, and you just transition. Um, but your question, how did I begin to change? You know, my just like you said, my concept of depression is ever evolving, and I'm still not sure how I feel about it. And as you grow through, you start doing inner work, you research, you find yourself in a dichotomy between science and spirituality. And there's a lot of things that go against each other. And there's a lot of information on one side, which would be spiritual, maybe more Eastern medicine that has been going on for thousands of years and tons of anecdotal evidence. And then we have the Western world that has, you know, more studies and science, but they don't always align. And so, how I bring that back is with depression. For years, I was said I am clinically depressed as a person. I must have low serotonin levels. And as I've gone through the process, and I'll circle back one more time, is that the difference between depressed and depression is depressed is caused by a catalyst, so a breakup, losing your job, something like that. Depression, you could have everything going great and you still want to die, and that's where I was at the
Yeah.
time. I had an amazing relationship. I was at the time the most up and coming bodybuilder in the Northwest. I was making multiple six figures. I had an amazing family, and I would go to bed wanting to die. And
Mhm.
and that is what I consider depression. And sometimes I would feel very, I would say, almost disrespected or hurt when people would try to relate to it because they had and I didn't want to take away from their experience, but at the time that's what it could feel, because people would often be like, oh, I can relate. And I'm like, yeah, but you're telling me that you just had a bad thing happen, you're depressed. This is much different. Everything's great on the
Yeah.
outside, but I'm not great. And I think that one's a hard one for people to understand because we've seen those pictures of all, they always promote celebrities of it, but they're smiling. You know, Robin Williams is always a great example of that, where depression is them smiling, but inside, you know, they're not. So I still don't know um, what I think yet, and in a very distinctive way, but I've begun to shift further away from the science side of it because I truly believe that a lot of the depression that was there that we've labeled as that is all just a connection of different types of traumas and things I haven't healed. Because as I've done healing, I have pretty much gone away from most of my depression and having very few depressive states, which would then kind of go against what the science says. So the biggest thing for me was just that vulnerability, that breakthrough of owning what I was and what I was dealing with and facing it head on. Like, I can even figure out, you know, where this comes from. Where's the root of this? Uh, I went through that phase, and then I went through a big breakup with the person I thought I was going to be marrying and living, you know, together with for the rest of my life, and that sent me down a big spiral. And I started going to therapy, and I realized that I had a lot of dependency issues, and I realized I really struggled being alone. So that goes again to me breaking through the wall. That's what made me move to San Diego. Didn't know anybody in San Diego, so I'm like, how can I deal with struggling to be alone? I'm going to move to a city where I don't know a single person. So that was kind of the big shift for me. And when I got there, I had just removed, you know, being in a relationship. And my mom had stage 4 cancer at the time and was supposed to only have a few months to live, and yet my therapist was still pushing me to go, which was the hardest thing in my life. And then, you know, I had this big company, Alpha Meals, which I just literally walked away from. And now I'm in this new city, don't know a single person. Now I have no distractions, no vices, nothing. And I'm like, holy shit, you know, like I'm now dealing with all of this. And I don't know. And I'm like meeting people, and I kept going to, these people don't know anything about me. Like, how do I gain their validation, you know, in a way, because I'm still not secure and confident. I'm like, I just like went through this big shift of like a rebirth in a way. And so I did this thing that I don't recommend, but I would not allow myself anytime I was feeling down to utilize any accomplishment I ever had. So I would erase all accomplishments in my mind. So when I was dealing, you know, struggling, I would, you know, most people would be like, well, you know, I've done this, and they would use that. But I didn't want to have any of that. I wanted to learn how to take it all away and be secure based on just who I am, my values, how I treat people, how I show up in the world, how people feel around me. And so I stripped all that away, and it was really difficult. But that was the big shift on how I started healing, along with taking courses, you know, using different types of plant medicines. I've used many different types, um, and just really facing everything that I was dealing with. You know, how you do that. There's a lot of different methods, as you've experienced. You know, some people are journaling, some people are doing shadow work, and that's really the period that shifted for me.
I love that you differentiate the difference between depressed and depression, because you are absolutely right. I think there is a big difference. I would say, you know, I mean, looking at what I'm going through right now, there's been multiple major events that have taken place, and I know that this is temporary. You know, it's
Hmm.
not like everything is going well, but I'm still very depressed. But if I go backwards to my life 3 years ago, when I was like 25, I think I was at the peak of depression at that point. From the outside looking
Hmm.
in, I was 120 pounds and I was shredded. I had a successful corporate job. I was dating a man. We had just bought property to build a home on. I had 2 dogs. I drove a nice car. You know, like from the outside looking, I was traveling often. That's the Lana that people used to only see online, was this very
Right.
selective, curated version of myself. And I recently did some energy work, and something that came up was one of my biggest blockages was that feeling of depression around the age of 25. And that's when I really started to analyze how much actual depression, like you're talking about, has impacted me, because I think it was just my normal for so much of my life that I
Right.
didn't even really register that it was depression. I was just used to feeling that way, waking up every day trying to like find a reason to get out of bed kind of thing, you know? And I really think it came down to, of course, I didn't have connection with people because I wasn't living authentically. That's a major
Yeah.
component, is not having connection with people, but not living authentically. I mean, I really think that's such a huge component. And I have seen such a shift in the way that you've shown up in your online presence. And I feel like you consistently kind of bring your story back to this younger version of Josh who felt
Mhm.
insecure, who didn't feel seen, who felt, just is not the current version of Josh. And I feel like you do such a good job of honoring that boy exists within you, and you are still him, and everything you do is for him. And I feel
Right.
like when you're talking about, you were in such a place of success, right? But you didn't feel good. And I almost feel like, I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts? Do you feel like you, at that stage in your life, were living authentically and were in a spot where you were honoring that younger version of you? Because I feel like when there's a disconnect between our younger self and those wounds, it doesn't matter how successful we are, we're never going to feel good.
Yeah. It's a great question. And first, I think everyone should go through the process of reaching their successful goals. One, to prove to themselves. I think I just made a post this morning that, most people don't realize how capable they are because they've never actually really worked hard at something to prove to themselves and show themselves how powerful they are. But when you get to that point for the first time, and in the time that you are going for that, it's for all the wrong reasons. Typically, we think it's supposed to do. It's going to bring us this popularity that we didn't have, in school, or bring us this status. And once you get there, you're like, wow, it really is not great at the top, which you hear so many successful people say, but we're like, there's no way it's true because we never had it, we never tasted it. And then you have to rip all that down, and then it's okay to go back there, but you have to disconnect from it. Can you repeat your question one more time? I kind of forgot it.
Yeah, I feel like, so since the Josh that I knew back in the day, like I met Josh when he was
Oh, the
like,
disconnect.
yeah,
Yeah.
like he was successful, and I
Okay.
looked at you and I was like, "Oh, this man has it all." But I didn't know that you were struggling with depression so much. And I feel like now you've rebuilt, and now I feel like
Yeah.
you show up and you honor little Josh so often. And I'm wondering, for me, I feel like that was a huge part of coming home to myself and healing, was just making that reconnection with my younger self. So I'm curious, do you feel like that has played a role into your healing journey? It's just like that reconnection and living more authentically to honor your younger self
Yeah.
and his needs?
So I would say that always my path is so different than most, even with talking about this. I don't necessarily think about my inner child and that version of myself a lot. Whereas, in the research that we'll find in therapy, we're supposed to. But for me, it was just being authentic all the time, and
Mhm.
connecting to my authentic self, which inevitably does lead back to that. But I just don't necessarily use that as a connective tool. The thing that really was also a shift that I forgot to mention was I've always loved Julia Roberts. It's been like my favorite actress ever. I was in love with her. And when my sister was born, I actually named her Julia after Julia Roberts. And during that time period of 2018, I went to the coast, and the people that are not in Oregon, that's our beach, but it's called the coast. And I went to a hotel with my girlfriend at the time, and I went to the lobby, and they had like these DVDs there. You used to be able to get VHS tapes when you were a kid, and they had Eat, Pray, Love, and I'd never seen it. And it was obviously with Julia Roberts, so I'm like, oh, I gotta watch this. And that movie changed my whole fucking life because I realized that I didn't like doing alpha meals. Didn't like it at all. I was just a meal prep company that I had at the time. I hated that I was so disconnected. Like I got to help people because that's all I want to do. I'm a light worker. That's what I'm here for, is to help people. But I didn't get to see it. I didn't get to see the result. Like people just email in like, hey, I lost weight. And I'm like, okay, cool. I don't even know who you are, Kyle. Like I had all these customers buying meals. I didn't get to see it. I didn't get to connect to it. And I only was there for the money. And I realized that everything that I was doing in that time period was all for me to get validation. It was not even to care about what is what is what does Joshua want. If you were to ask me, and I still struggle to answer this question, what does Joshua make you happy? What does he really want? Especially back then, I have no idea. I couldn't even answer that. And I think most people can relate to that. So during that time period, it was really just connecting to my authentic self and realizing what's the intent about behind what I'm doing, and I wanted to, it wasn't like a 40-year-old, I don't know what you would call it, that she was going through. Mine was just, why would I be spending any amount of time doing something that I don't enjoy at all? I need to find something else. And that was what really started to me to like, I need to get away from this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love something you said earlier when you said that, your goal now is to just be warm. And um, I feel like, you know what, maybe I'm just on the path behind you because I'm about to go to San Diego. And maybe that just means
Yeah,
I'm off track by myself with my dog.
yeah,
Um, but it's funny because my whole perception on what I want from life, it used to be very um, milestone focused. Like if you asked me what my goal was in life, I would tell you a list of all of these milestones that I wish to achieve.
right.
And now I feel like my only purpose in life, my only desire for like what I wish to achieve in life is to be known as somebody who is very warm and loving and who,
Mhm.
was a beacon of like was light for other people to hopefully, you know, heal or whatever that looks like for them. So
Yeah,
and maybe that's why I'm feeling such a strong connection to you. But going back to what you said with your healing process and kind of exploring with plant medicine, I want to dive into that a little bit simply
yeah, let's
because
go.
that's been a part of my journey. And I am somebody who, when I was younger, when I was really clinically depressed, and again, I could also talk about the spiritual science depression thing because for me, I was told when I was younger, I'm depressed simply because I was born with a brain that doesn't produce as much serotonin as other brains. That's it.
Yeah,
It was just this, it was a chemical imbalance. And now I completely disagree with that analysis. Completely. That would have to be a conversation for another day. But long story short, I was
yeah,
taken to the doctors at a very young age and I was prescribed antidepressants at the age of 14. And there was something within me, and this is one of many moments that I feel like my inner spark was just continuing to guide me on a path that was meant for me. I don't know why I had an aversion to them, but I hoarded the pills under my bed and I didn't take them. And I'm so grateful to this day that I didn't do that because I've watched a
interesting.
couple people close to me try and get off the pills after being on them for a decade plus, and it's been a very difficult process. And I'm in no way shaming anybody that uses medication to help themselves feel better at all. I think there are tools out there and you should utilize them if that's what you need. But I am also really curious about alternative methods to feeling better, and plant medicine has been a huge component to my journey. So I want to hear about your plant medicine journey. What kind of got you started on that? Where did it take you? What led you to Mycrobloom and where you're at today?
Yeah, so the first medicine that and I didn't use it with this intention, but the first medicine I used that made the biggest shift in my life was actually MDMA. I would or like label myself as someone that was like ice cold. I had zero connection to emotions, or at least not very much, and was just an ice box. I didn't express, I didn't talk, I wasn't vulnerable. I mean, even myself in high school was just someone who just like walked around with his head down and didn't speak. But with so much trauma that I dealt with um, throughout my life, I was just thought that earlier I said dependent, but I meant codependency is what I was struggling with. But it just shut off my emotions. And then taking MDMA allowed me to connect so much to love, which I had never really experienced. And it just like blossomed this new flower inside me. And I remember just having so much love for everybody. And it continued on. It was like it wasn't something I just experienced then, like you may with other drugs. Like it shifted my entire life and my ability. And it's not like I didn't love people. I mean, I had love for people because that's when you're someone who's depressed and has gone through tons of trauma, your natural response is you want to care for everybody else. When I used that MDMA for the first time, it really just connected me to that love part of my body, and that vibration that I hadn't really fully felt, which began to probably start the process of loving myself. But I remember that so distinctly as such a big shift. It's like I'd never experienced in my life, and ability to connect with people on a deeper level and lower my judgment towards people. And if there's any drug out there that if I were to pick one, even though I have a mushroom business, I would still pick MDMA over everything for someone to choose. Just because even if you had depression or had mental health issues, the experience of being able to love someone will overpower, everything. You being able to love yourself and love other people, I think, is such a stronger vibration than anything else. But then with mushrooms, um, I started Mycrobloom in we're in 2023, June of 22, somewhere around there. So it's been a little bit over a year, almost a year and a half. And I started with my partner, Miranda. She was in the Marine Corps, so she had, been around a lot of people with PTSD, and so have I. Most of my family is in the military or was. And I'll be very honest that mushrooms were not a huge part of my healing process. They definitely have impacted me in an amazing way since taking them. But most of my healing work was done before mushrooms, although a lot of people around me, that was the thing that really helped push them through. Interestingly enough, the brainwave scans that they've done for people while they did pre-taking mushrooms, during, and post. On the brain scan, if it's like a landscape, there's a lot of holes and valleys. And so when thoughts are going across that brainwave, they struggle to go across the brain, which makes people stuck. People's brains are stuck on a thought. You just spiral on the same thought, like I'm worthless, like I'm never getting out of this, whatever you suck, because the way it's like in the landscape, it looks like Mars or something. There's a big mountain and there's holes, and those thoughts just get stuck there. Well, even in the first time of taking mushrooms, it begins to flatten out that surface and there's less ridges. So the thoughts can actually start to begin to go across the plane, so to speak, and allows you to break through thinking patterns, which is why it creates such a big shift. In studies, they've seen even one macro dose reduce depression by up to 70% for 5 years. More studies have come out that it might not last that long, but it for sure lasts over a year. They just followed up on a study they started doing 2017, 2019. They followed up with them in 2022 and released a study that showed that the one dose that they took, they had huge improvements for over a year in their depression. And how that really works on the brain is, and if you look at the actual brain scan, on a normal basis, there's different parts of our brain firing at one time. But on mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, almost your entire brain is lit up, and it connects parts of our brain that aren't typically connecting, which also in a way creates your brain to what they call very disorganized. But this disorganization allows you to break through all of those thoughts, similar to how it clears the plane. And it even disconnects some of the normal things that are connecting. For example, the ego is typically firing the least amount when you're on psilocybin, where everything else is lit up and connected. So, I mean, medicinal mushrooms, specifically psilocybin, are incredible. They have such an impact on people in many different ways, from microdosing to macrodosing. And you've been microdosing for a while now, right?
Probably a little over a year. I did take some time off when I went through my TBI.
What's that been like for you?
It's been beautiful for me. I also enjoy an occasional macro dose too, but for me, I decided to start exploring the idea of microdosing. Well, I had been reading about it for a little while, but I hadn't really played around with it. When I went through my big breakup last year, and I just was like, I really just was starting to be curious about my life being completely different than what it was. And oh my God, why it's doing this? You're good. I have been reading about mushrooms for a little while because Lana, I have to do my full research before I dive into something. And yeah, I decided I was emerging from probably the darkest state of depression I've ever experienced and just wanted to start playing around and feeling better. And I had been really curious about a lot of different things at that life. I think that was, or at that point in my life, I think that was when I really started to be curious about giving up alcohol. And yeah, I ended up ordering some tea. I started with tea, so I really didn't know
Okay.
dosage at all. I was just kind of
Yeah.
winging it. But there was a
Lemon.
there
It's
was
called lemon teching.
yeah, there was a couple times at the beginning where I was like, okay, this is going to be an interesting work day.
Yeah. And
I
it
got to just go.
happens.
There was one day I was like, I just got to go out in nature. I'll be back. I'll be back when I'm
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
wasn't. Um, but anyway, I didn't really feel anything for a little while because I was just microdosing at first. I didn't do like, anything major at first. So it wasn't like overnight I was like, whoa, I feel different. You know what I mean? It was like
Yeah.
cumulative over time that I just started to feel better. I um, am somebody that's also always suffered from anxiety. So I just think I started to feel better mentally. I started to feel clearer mentally. And I just felt like overall, like I was sleeping better. I just felt cognitively and mentally, I just felt better as a whole. And I started kind of, and I was just going on the internet, like, and finding like, okay, how often am I supposed to do
Yeah.
this? Like, how do I cycle this in and out? Um, so I would say I was very much just winging it, but I did start to feel better. And then I did explore, at that point, it wasn't until like early last year that I had ever actually like done like an actual like mushroom trip or like a macro dose and experimented with it in that way. So that was when I really started to dive deep into myself, I think. I also, when you were talking about MDMA, I'm like, I feel the exact same way. I feel like if somebody has to pick one, then for me, MDMA has it totally has changed my life. And I've only actually
Yeah.
done it a handful of times, but each time has been in such a setting that it was just some of the most intense therapy that I've ever
Hmm.
experienced. And it's opened my heart up in ways that I don't think anything else on this planet would have that capability in that amount of time to be able to have that big of an impact. So everything you were saying, I'm like, yes, yes, and
Yeah.
yes.
It's
So,
actually. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
It's a non-negotiable for me, for any relationship I get in, that they're open to MDMA. And the reason why, although I do take it recreationally, I would like to implement quarterly checkups for a relationship utilizing MDMA, because if most people don't know, I mean, MDMA and ecstasy are essentially the same thing. Ecstasy is a pressed tab formula of MDMA plus some other type of stimulant, which is a little bit, can be more unsafe. MDMA is just the root. But they utilize it in for PTSD, but more so they use it in marriage counseling. That's one of the main things that MDMA is used for, because the ability to connect and communicate on MDMA is incredible. But even more so, your ability to want to actually understand and accept, not accept, you are able to feel everything they're saying with love. Because typically if you're having some issue in a relationship, first you might have a problem expressing it, whatever, because maybe your partner has not received it well in the past, or you just have a struggle with expressing what you need or your boundaries. So first it'll help you to express it. And then on the other side, the person will receive it with love versus, they may have felt, jealousy or some other type of, quote unquote negative emotion come up. Um, and then not able to actually understand and implement the connection. So that's become a very big thing for me. I haven't been in a relationship where I've implemented that yet, but it's like a part of my plan just because I know how beneficial it is. Um, but back to mushrooms, there's not a lot of research yet because it's still legal in every state. There's a few states where they have one either decriminalized or they have legalized it for therapeutic use. Like in Oregon, they've legalized it for therapy use, but it's not even started until 2025 is the proposed date. And essentially, what that would be like a therapy center where someone could go in, similar like ketamine therapy
Mhm.
or even just psychological therapy. They would take it at the setting and do work there. In Colorado, they've legalized it as you're allowed to grow it and you're not allowed to sell it, but you're allowed to gift it. It's very weird. I don't understand. It's like if you went into maybe a smoke shop and you bought like some type of smoking product, you could also gift you mushrooms. So which is like a step. Unfortunately, I'm not as optimistic as other people. I really don't believe it's going to be legalized. I almost want to say in our generation, um, unless, but all, unless like our people really begin to come together. I mean, with how things have gone the last few years, we've really become more aware of corruption in all different areas of the country.
Mm.
And so maybe we'll be able to break through that. But, when cannabis was legalized, it didn't take away from any other market. And the reason that cannabis originally was um, made illegal was in the earlier 1900s. I forget the gentleman's first name, but his last name was Hearst. He has Hearst Castle in California. He was one of the biggest paper producers. And then they found that marijuana and hemp could be cheaper, lighter, produced in only a few months versus years instead of trees, and it was stronger. And so essentially he, put money into the powerful people in the government that he was connected to and had it legalized. And it took that many years for it to, and we all remember that, well, it's kind of before our time, but like in the 80s and 70s, there was those commercials of people doing reefer and it was like scrambling their brain is what they would say. But when it was legalized, it didn't take away from any other market. It just was a benefit.
Mhm.
Whereas some of the biggest markets, aside from pain medication, are SSRIs, Adderall, anxiety medication, and psilocybin would directly affect that, which we are all very aware of how corrupt the pharmaceutical industry is. So I'm not as optimistic as other people. I would love for it to be legalized, but luckily there are people like myself that are taking the risk to navigate at the sacrifice of wanting to help people because it's so incredible what it's been able to do for people. We have hundreds of testimonials of people that have, you know, told us that they've never felt, that light and energy, or at least in the last 10 years, they haven't felt that, or they've gotten off their anxiety medication, got off their SSRIs, um, and just felt themselves again. And how people react is everybody is different. If you go into anything thinking it's going to be a pill or a supplement or a method that's going to completely change your life, it might not work, for you. But the intention behind everything is what's most important and how you implement that. And the same thing with SSRIs. If you take SSRIs, but you don't do any of the other work,
Mhm.
you're going to struggle coming off of it. If you take
Yeah.
SSRIs and then you do all the inner work, you can transition off of it much easier because you've done the work to create tools and create new, worked on your neuroplasticity and create new pathways so that you've actually done the work. The tool just kind of helps you get there. As far as SSRIs with psilocybin, people can just take it regularly to improve their connection, their ability to handle stress, um, their creativity, their overall happiness and mood. And there's a couple different ways that people take it. It's either typically it's 4 on, 3 off, or every other day, or there's every third day in doses of 75. I only recommend 75 to 150 milligrams typically, or 75 to 200 milligrams, but the studies have been more showing 100 milligrams to 300 milligrams. So it just really depends on the person.
That's so useful. I think a lot of people are going to be curious about what that actually looks like. I was doing every third day.
Uh-huh.
So I did find something on the internet that was right. And you brought up a really good point, and I think it's nothing is like a cure-all, right? You should also be doing all of the other work. And for me, I decided to start experimenting with microdosing, but I also was doing all of the other work, all of the other work with
Yeah.
it. So, and I also forgot to mention, and you just brought it up, which reminded me is for me, one of my biggest motivators of taking it was also creativity because I am somebody who forgot that I was a creative, really, truly.
Yeah.
And then when I decided I wanted to be curious about what creativity looked like within me, I had all of these narratives within my brain that I wasn't creative, I couldn't be creative, I was bad at being creative. So I was like, what if I just start playing? What if I just start playing with no expectations? Started implementing microdosing. I was able to be I was able to be creative with less judgment of myself. And then that's now I would consider myself to be an extremely creative person. But it was I had to change those pathways in my brain and all those narratives in my brain that I had around the fact that I wasn't something or I wasn't creative,
Yeah.
I think that's probably been the most beneficial impact because creativity brings me joy
Hmm.
and
It kicks you
creativity
most to your inner
also,
child.
yeah, has aligned me to this path where I'm at now. So goodbye
Yeah.
corporate finance world, and here we
And
are.
I think
But
something you noted there is also something I wanted to touch on earlier was you have to be very careful with what you label yourself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
just you saying, I'm not creative, our brain doesn't know the difference between yes or no. It just knows the word and will attach to that. But, even in our energy towards it, we're saying I'm not creative. It's not in a positive light. So your your brain might not attach to it, but then your subconscious will attach to, which those are in there, but it will attach to, I'm not creative. Same as like if you continue to say I'm depressed, I'm depressed, I'm depressed, it's just going to build up further. And you really have to be careful with that. And why, the woo woo of, manifesting and choosing, being very careful about the words you choose, or even saying the thing that you want to be that you're not yet, why it has so much of an impact. And I love the study that they did that most people know about of have two plants in the same environment. And the one plant they speak loving, positive words to, and the other plant they speak negative words to, and the plant that they speak negative to dies, and the one they speak loving to just continues to blossom. And if a plant that happens to a plant, just speaking to it, imagine what it's doing to our body and our minds.
Oh yeah, I mean, been a study. It was by a Japanese researcher who actually just put uh, statements on bottles of water, and they were positive or negative, and then examined the water under a microscope, and bottles of water that had positive words written on it had like these beautiful crystalline structures, and then the bottles of water that had negative statements were just like they were completely different. They were impacted. I completely agree with that, and I think that's something that even this weekend I was sitting with because I've been depressed for 3 weeks now.
Yeah.
I think I've been depressed for longer. I think losing my job pushed me over the edge. And when I
Hmm.
say depressed, I don't really think of it as a negative thing. I think I've entered a state of healing over the last few months. My body's been preparing for a change. It knew there was some stuff I was still holding on to that I needed to work through and release for me to be able to really step into this new version of myself, right? So I don't
Yeah.
really like to use the word depressed as a negative thing, but then losing my job just kind of it shot me over the edge, and I felt wildly out of control for a few weeks. Um, and this weekend I was like, I'm done. I'm done. I
Yeah.
am done being depressed. I'm time to move forward, right?
Right.
Now, I know that's a privilege, and I think that's a delicate balance, right? Because if you genuinely are going through a really hard time, you want to be kind to yourself and you want to show yourself all the compassion that you need. If maybe getting through the day and doing the bare minimum is all you can manage right now, you don't want to, like, I think it's important to be aware of that and show yourself love and grace, because I think the only way to pull yourself out of anything is to love yourself through the process. But I
Hmm.
also found myself a lot over the last few weeks. I'm like, I kept telling myself I'm depressed. And I'm like, what if I'm still depressed because I'm telling myself I'm depressed?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
if I'm still healing because all I want to do is talk about all the healing? And it was this thing where I'm like, I
True.
do think this was a necessary part of my process, was this deep examination of my younger self and everything that I've endured. But I'm like, I'm keeping myself stuck there because it's all that I'm focusing on. It's all that I'm talking about. And now I'm ready to just look forward and focus on what's ahead. And of course, there will be moments in the future where I have to revisit my past self because patterns or tendencies might come up that I need to self-examine. But I just feel like now I've outgrown my stay here of like looking in the past, and now I'm ready to
Yeah.
just move forward. And I think it is so important to be aware of that, how we speak to ourselves, the narratives that we tell ourselves. I mean, we all have these narratives about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And just being very aware of the way that we speak to ourselves, and also being very aware of what we tell ourselves we are, or the situation that we're in. Yeah, I mean, power of our mind and our words is what is going to completely change everybody's lives once you
Yeah.
become aware of that. So, facts, you're
I
spitting facts.
used to not connect to that at all and thought it was bonkers, to be honest. But I now have seen how much of an impact it truly makes and how important it is. Of maybe instead of saying we're depressed, it's saying I'm in a time where I need deep rest instead of deep
Hmm.
rest. And I need to, you know, push my energy back into myself. And, I'm missing something or I'm drained, whatever it is. It just, that's part of the phase. And I love that you went there because I actually thought about you earlier this week because I made a video on my story talking about, I had worked like 16 hours and I still was like, oh, I still went to the gym and all this stuff. And I thought about you a lot in that moment because, it was important. I didn't end up talking about it, but it was important for me to note in my head that I end up sharing is that you have to recognize what phase you're in. If you're a very, beginning phase of something, especially when it comes to achievement, you know, you shouldn't give yourself as much grace. You'll give yourself a little bit of grace because, you're very new, you don't want to discourage yourself. And then at the end, you can give yourself a lot more grace because you've already built habits, you've already been there, you can give yourself more grace. But in the middle, you have to kind of be a lot harder on yourself so you can get there. But the point of what I was wanting to get to was that, you know, um, in certain phases, you're having to really listen to your body, and that's what made me think of you. It's like in that like the phase that I'm in currently, I've been at a very high level, and I want to reach this extremely next level. I had this, and it's in every version of myself. But for me to do that, I have to very much harden my mind to get to this next level. And I don't mean like make it cut off for emotion. I have to push past all levels of uncomfortability and what I have thought I was capable of. And to do that, I can't always listen to my body. And especially beginning and people in the beginning phase, you can't listen to your body as much then because your mind has taught you you have no idea. You have no idea how to connect your body because your mind is telling you something that's completely different. I'm tired. I'm not capable. I'm not this. And then you're like, oh, I need to listen to that. But when you have worked past that, you definitely can go through a phase where like, my phase is not accomplishment, or success based. My phase now is how do I honor my inner self? How do I listen to my body? How do I learn how to listen to my intuition? And really connect to that and know when is enough, when is not too much, and be able to connect to yourself because most people are so connected to the outside world or a man telling them how they should look, how should they should show up, what they're supposed to do, especially for women. I mean, it's so much worse for women than men is the society telling them how they should talk, how they should look, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, and how they should show up in the world. And you get either so disconnected or have never yet disconnected to what do I want? What is my body telling me to do? What feels best to me, not what does the world want me to be?
I think that's so important. And I think so many of us are just completely disconnected from even being aware that our body is asking us for things, right? Or
Hmm.
so we can't even honor what our body needs. And I definitely agree that there are ebbs and flows depending on where you're at in
Yeah.
whatever phase you're going through or whatever you're trying to build. And for most of my life, I didn't even know that my body was trying to communicate to me. So, I would have all these weird, crazy health things come up because it was my body being like, slow the fuck down, sit,
Yeah.
relax. I had no understanding. In the last year and a half, I've pulled back completely. You've witnessed that. I have
Yep.
really honored my body with everything that she's asking for, even though it's felt very uncomfortable. I've completely pulled back in my training, just have been taking a gentle approach to everything. And I wake up every morning and I ask my body, what do you need from me today? And I honor that even if it feels weird or uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And when I got laid off, I was like, okay, this is the opportunity I've been waiting for because honestly, I had been asking to be laid off. It was the best case scenario for me because I was like, if not, I need
Yeah.
to quit my job by the end of the year because that was my deadline. I was like, I gotta take a plunge by the end of the year and I'm terrified. And so like the universe kind of forced my hand a little bit.
Luckily. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
it was the best case scenario. And but then I just like immediately dove into things and I wasn't even listening to what my body was asking for at all because I was all operating from this place of fear. And I kind of just did that thing where I disconnected again from what my body had been asking for. So I'm like, here's my fear response. That's like, you must do, like I've always been somebody that's had to take care of myself and I always have 15 million backup plans. And then I had this deep internal pull and call that was like, you need a rest, Lana. You like, baby, just relax. And I was ignoring
Yeah.
that. And I kept going after this. So I was doing this big seesaw back and forth. Like every week I would be like, okay, Monday I'm hitting the ground running. By Friday I'm bedridden. Right. And then finally it was probably 2 weeks ago. I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to take actually like at least a full week off of work. I've never done that since 16 years old. I've worked full time my entire life. I've never even had a week off in between jobs. I'm going to take a break and I'm going to see
Yeah.
what happens. And I took about 10, 11 days off. And this was by Sunday. I was like, okay, like I've sat in this and my body feels rested. And I even got sick in there. And I almost feel like that was my body's way of being like, you're not resting enough. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, okay, I know you're not working, but you're still out here doing all these
Yeah, yeah,
activities. So like you actually just need to get in bed. And by the end of day Sunday, I was like, okay, one, like you said, the awareness. I realized that I've been kind of keeping myself like I really hadn't been managing the way that I was speaking about the situation and the way that I was speaking to myself through, through this process. But even by Sunday, I was like, okay, I'm feeling like this new energy. I'm feeling like ready for what's next. I feel like I'm about to emerge from this cocoon. It's going to be a messy process, but everything Lana
yeah,
does is messy. So we're going to go with it. But I felt like by Monday, I was like, I'm ready for structure in my gym routine again. Like, I'm ready for some structure back in my life. I'm ready to push myself a little bit more. I have not tracked my workouts in the gym. And this is just one little way that I feel like my body's like gearing up to be in a position where I think I'm going to be able to push myself a little bit more. Right. So starting this week, I actually have a training program in the gym and I'm actually going to like try and do progressive
yeah,
overload again for the first time in a while. But that's because I'm very in tune with my body and my body is telling me that. So I definitely agree that there are different phases. I think I'm about to enter another phase where things will be a little less soft. And I think I will push myself a little bit more. I'm going to be in the trenches of trying to grow this dream of mine, this business of mine, especially as I start to take off and go God knows where, like I'm definitely going to
yeah,
start pushing myself in so many different capacities. And I feel ready. Even just yesterday, I worked until 8 p.m. trying to I'm trying to build a website. I could just hire somebody, but I'm like, this is good skills for me to learn, and I haven't worked like that in a while. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
got up at 4:30, went to the gym, like had a whole work day yesterday and felt energized and ready to do it. So I definitely feel like I'm entering this new stage where I'm like, things will be a little less soft, but that doesn't
yeah.
mean it, my body is ready for that. My body can handle that. And I
Hmm.
think it's so important to have connection with your body and to be able to, so you even know what she's asking for. And
Yeah,
if we're entering a build stage, I think she's going to be ready for it. I
yeah,
know she's ready for it, but we had to go through the mud there for a while, and we had to soften for a while. And there might be other periods in the future. The ultimate goal, like you said, my ultimate goal is to live a very soft life. Like I want to be one with moss and nature, like I say. I want to really live a very mellow life, but I know that that doesn't happen on its own and that there's work I have to do to get there.
yeah.
And I'm willing to
Uh,
do it.
yeah. And that's
So,
the first part, is being willing. And that's something I ask people all the time in any facet is to think about that question. Are you willing? Because an example I give is, let's say you've been focused on getting a new car for so long, right? And if you think about how much extra money you need, maybe you work a job. Okay, I have to pick up a shift on Saturday or start doing Uber or something like that. Okay, well at that then I sacrifice me time, I sacrifice family time, and I have to continue to do that. So am I willing to do that to get the result? And when you ask yourself that question, which most people don't, they realize, no, I'm not. Or whatever it is. But let's say they realize I'm not actually willing to sacrifice that. And you can finally let go of that instead of feeling like because if not, you're always connected to that thing that you might want, but you're not actually willing. So you can like let it go. You can let it go. And I was curious what your experience has been like trying to connect more to your feminine, because I can already tell that like your life has been very much in the masculine. And it sounds like even in the relationships you were in, they weren't even healthy masculine. So you still were in your masculine. So what has that been like for you? I think we're kind of coming up on time here. I'll
oh,
wrap up and leave it here. What has that been like for you trying to learn how to connect more to your feminine and then maybe even know what to look for um, when attracting more of a masculine into your life?
oh yeah. Well, this is going to be a long answer and also my 2:30 rescheduled. So we have a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Um, oh my gosh. Okay, I didn't even know anything about feminine or masculine, I mean, probably until maybe 2 years ago. I didn't even know the term the patriarchy until probably 2 years ago. Okay. So I've been living under a rock. This has been something that has been extremely difficult for me because I've operated my entire life in my masculine.
Yeah.
I grew up very, very poor. I grew up with a lot of trauma. I spent almost all of my 20s trying to scrap my way out of the circumstances I was born into. And there just really isn't room in an environment like that for you to soften into your femininity at all, right? Because you're
Yeah.
surviving. And then, yes, the partnerships that I chose, not masculine men at all. I attracted men that were very in their feminine because I was very in my masculine.
Yeah,
And I just don't think that you're going to be able to attract a man that's in his masculine if you're in your masculine. I just, it doesn't, the equation doesn't work, you know?
it's not as often. I always attract masculine women because I really like the idea of not saving them into their feminine, but because I like women that have that masculine energy, but then they don't have to anymore.
Yeah.
It's not like they can choose not to. They still have that power. But yeah, it takes an extremely masculine man to try to
Yes.
attract, work with a masculine woman. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So I told myself when I decided to start dating again, well, okay, no, let me backtrack. A year and a half ago, I became single, and then I kind of started dating a little bit because I really haven't dated in my life. I was in my 20s were spent in two long-term partnerships. Really, there was less than a year gap between the two of them, and they were both men that were significantly older than me, and
Hmm.
in a way, kind of groomed me. So I've never dated and had any like dating experiences until I became single at 27. So I'm like a 15-year-old in a 27-year-old body out here on the dating scene. No, I'm
Yeah,
kidding, but I started dating, and I dated a little bit last summer and then a little bit last fall, and I was like, none of this is it. And I decided probably last October, November, that I was like, yo, I need to sit down and like actually become somebody that I would want to date, because I'm not even sure if I'm somebody that I would want to date right now. And that's
right.
when I really
Yeah,
started digging into what I want from a future partnership and how I wanted to show up in relationships. And I started exploring the idea of softening into my feminine. Although at first I was like, this is bullshit. This is just the patriarchy. This is just perpetuating the patriarchy. And I do think that there are valid arguments behind that. But I ultimately was like, what do I want? What, regardless of what this is or isn't, what do I want? How do I want my relationship dynamic to look like? And um, yeah, I would say like the first step of being in your feminine is, I think, in a way, being able to actually let your guard down.
right.
I have never done that before in a relationship. I mean, I dated a man for 5 years, and he didn't know probably half the things I've been talking about on my podcast, because I didn't feel like it was safe enough to do that. So
Right.
it's learning to like let your guard down and actually allow people to see you, or allow men that you're dating to see you. I think that's really difficult. Um, okay, I don't know if this is going to make any sense. These are just like steps that I started trying to take, right?
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, it's your story.
trying to be open to the idea of like receiving from a man. That is something that made me very uncomfortable. It still makes me uncomfortable. I'm getting better at it though. Like, it's
Hmm.
something that I am still working on. Um,
Yeah,
and yeah, I really just started like doing a lot of reading on what I should look for, like in the initial stages of dating, to help identify if a man is in his masculine or in his feminine. Is he somebody that takes initiative? Is he somebody that wants to give? And it doesn't, when I say give, it doesn't have to be financial resources.
no, of course, yeah.
It can be time, it can be energy. Are they somebody that wants to give to me rather than take right away? Because if somebody wants to take from me right away, I can pretty easily identify that they are in their feminine, right? So I think sometimes when we think of somebody being in their masculine, it's like, well, for a long time I thought it was a physical, it presented a
Yeah,
physical way, which is
most people
now,
think that way.
yeah, it's complete.
Yeah,
I've learned that that's not the case. But it's more just being able to identify. I think I lost my train of thought there.
that's
We'll,
okay.
we'll
Yeah, you
revisit
were
that.
just talking about identifying masculine and how that's showing up in the how you described masculine and feminine energy. Um, because you were saying a masculine typically you thought was the appearance, but it's ways that they provide and lead and
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I thought it was appearance at first, and then I thought like somebody being in their masculine was very much like, yeah. I think I thought for a long time it was all kind of surrounding like resources, right?
yeah,
Like a man
it,
that's like going to give to you, and give only in like a financial way. I think that's something that it's a common misperception that, and that they're going to be willing to like buy you things or like give to you in a when it comes to resources. And that is a
yeah,
component of it, I do believe.
yeah.
But
And there's an area of that is varies for what people's belief on it is, of course.
yeah. Um, but for me, what I started to realize was I'm going to feel it in my, like, if I just focus on being in my feminine, like I'm going to more than likely attract a man that's in his masculine. I don't think if I'm in my feminine, I'm going to attract a man that's in his feminine. If I'm looking for somebody to lead, and if I'm looking for somebody who is going to be strong enough for me to surrender into, if I'm looking for somebody who's wanting to provide and give to me in all the different ways, I'm not going to attract a man that's also wanting the same. He's not going to be into me. He's not going to
Yeah.
be like interested in me in that way. So I'm definitely still like an infant on this journey. So I
Mhm.
don't know if this is going to make any sense, but my non-negotiable when I decided to start dating again from a much more secure place, a much more healed place this last summer was even though I'm not looking, I would say I'm very casually looking for the love of my life. I'm not like in any rush to settle down or anything like that. I
Yeah.
have a lot of exploration I need to do. But even for me to entertain something even more casual with somebody, it was I have to feel like they're strong enough for me to fully surrender into because
Yeah.
in every capacity, emotionally, mentally, physically, because I have never had that in my entire life. And was dating somebody for a couple months now, very casually. And I was like, okay, in so many ways, I was like, there's emotional safety, there's full acceptance of self, there's all of the way, like would rearrange a schedule to pick me up because like I didn't drive anywhere, it was like all of these different ways. No, I never picked up a bill anywhere. Even though this person was younger than me and we were in different financial situations, I was like, okay, this man is like wanting to give to me. He's in his masculine. But then I
Yeah.
also realized there's still all these other components of like, I still don't feel like I could fully surrender into that person. Does that mean I have more work to do myself? Most likely. But I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. You tell me where you're at because you are like way farther along on your journey. And I'm like, I love all your content on it. And I think speaking to men about this is so important. I want to preface this really quick and say I don't think our sexuality wound is like all on men. I think it's a shared responsibility, but I
Mhm.
think content geared towards men is like there's just not enough of it out there that's healthy. So
Yeah.
you tell me where you're at, and if you have any input for you tell me because I'm like I'm trying to figure this out and I'm running blind over here because I don't
Yeah.
come
I
from
mean,
like any kind of background where this was normal, or I never witnessed it. So this is me trying to teach myself in a way.
yeah. And one thing I wanted to note on the content creation, un- I'm always just big on just, hey, we don't live in what we wish the world would be, just live in exactly how it is, right? And there's a lot of amazing content creators that are men that put out amazing content, but I would say most, especially the 75% of the country in the middle and in the South, are not going to accept um, that person's information because of how they look, and they're not as masculine alpha appearing. That's
Mhm.
unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. They luckily get to speak to a lot of people, and I'm only just kind of generalizing in part of our country, but I think it makes sense to most people. Um, and so, I was wanted to make content, and I've always thought that. And then when I really started to realize, hey, like I need to put myself out there more because unfortunately, I am more of the masculine appearing man. I can reach other people that those people aren't reaching. And there's ways to even be feminine in your business. That people don't realize. If you've been someone that's been very structured, it's like, okay, I have to separate from that structure and the scheduling, and which is very hard. You're probably someone that is very scheduled, like, and going into your feminine, it's like, hey, I'm gonna flow more. Does it feel best for me to go work out right now, or does it feel best for me to start writing right when I wake up? And that's allowing yourself to be more in your feminine because it's like, what does my body want? What does my emotion want? Let me flow into that. With my business, it's easy to go with very masculine, like I need to do this, this, and this to grow my business and present a certain way. But then when we're doing that, we're like, who says that? Who's saying
Mhm.
that? Whereas I'm going to go back and say, oh, today Lana wants to talk about this, and she wants to show up this way, and she can flow more into that. So there's a lot of ways to begin that shift of going into your feminine. But I would say, me personally, I was in my feminine mostly my entire life. I didn't ever had an example of a healthy relationship or man or anything. And I based all my ideas of relationships off of movies. I'm like, I'm the biggest romantic ever. Any
We're
guy I've
Pisces.
ever
We're
met.
Pisces.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought that I was supposed to, like, in the movies, I was supposed to love my partner more than anything in the world. And
Mhm.
I thought that was what I was supposed to do. Like, shit, they're have her on a pedestal, and that's what ruined my life. Was a big portion of what ruined my last relationship. And she's like, you love me more than you love yourself. I'm like, yeah,
Ain't that the
that's
point?
right. Yeah. And I, didn't realize I was so far in my or in my feminine. And now I would say I'm very, very strong in my masculine. People feel that, um, all the things that I was terrible at before, I am great at now, which is, I was terrible at communicating. Now I'm a great communicator. I had no idea how to make someone feel safe and hold space for them. Now those are things that are important to me. So, in the masculine feminine space, we've strayed far away from how relationships used to be, unfortunately. And I'm really big on trying to get back to a lot of the positives of how relationships used to be. Um, I do believe in what is the term they use for that, for traditional style relation? I don't know what you would. I mean, my idea of
Chivalry?
relationship that I what's that?
Is it chivalry?
No, no, not. It's like what they view as traditional relationships, like a woman is not working and things like that. I mean, traditional roles, I guess I want to
Hmm.
say. I agree with that to the standpoint of, as a man, I want to show up with, when I meet my wife, as, hey, I'm going to provide for us financially. I don't want you to have to be in your masculine at all, but I would, my like thing is, I want you to do something with, like, whatever that is, whether it's just your art, whatever it is, or if you want to work, go work, but I don't want you to have to be your masculine. And that choice is a big deal for a woman. I know that's not as common anymore, one, just from how our men are today. There's a lot more feminine energy out there, but it's also because the resources are not the same as they used to be as far as financially for people. But I think that a man he should be clear on his path. He should lead. He should be chivalrous. He should create. If you are not able to provide, and this is only my opinion, don't date, and it doesn't mean pay for all of their bills, but if you're not able to mostly provide, it depends on your age. So you meet someone, you're 25, you're like, hey, we're going to work on this together, but my goal is to be able to, provide. And whether that is so you can have kids or not, I promise men, I mean, I think it's probably more women that listen to your podcast, but I promise out there that you will never experience the greatest version of a woman until you've allowed her to be fully in her feminine. There's just this powerful goddess that's there that you get to experience, that's going to make you a better man by experiencing that, because she gets to connect to what women have been for generations. That has nothing to do with what they're doing in the kitchen or any of those things that are very misogynistic ideas, but it's just they are full of love and energy and safety and grounding and passion and connection. And men can be better men when they have that, when their woman is able to be in that space. And um yeah, I mean, I feel really passionate about that right now, just because I have been around women my entire life, and I have a lot of women friends, female friends, which is different. I'm different than most in that way, and I just am so disgusted at the way that I've seen women be treated in every way. I mean, the fact that we have such a high percentage of people women that have been sexually abused, just makes me sick. And we need to do a better job of teaching men how to be men. And obviously, we know that on the other side, women have gone to their masculine, but don't push off anybody else. Part of being a man is just own your shit, and
Hmm.
say, I'm going to step up. That's what men have always done. Is they step up, they take charge, and they lead, and they build a path, and they take ownership, even if they're not always, in the wrong. That's part of just, being a man is, and that's what, we've looked at as these powerful men. They do what needs to be done to, in any fashion, to provide and to grow our world or our planet.
I love that. It's funny because I keep getting this message with my business that's like, the only way this works is if you relax into it.
Yeah,
They're like, the only
well,
way this works is if you relax into it. And I do think that's the only way I think it's how I'm going to be able to show up as my most authentic self. I'm
yeah,
still kind of figuring out who that is. And I agree that most men don't even know what it's like to experience, like
oh yeah,
actually experience a soft feminine woman. And I have been telling my girlfriends this lately because I'm like, I don't know if I've ever allowed somebody to see soft Lana, like romantic Lana, the Lana that writes poetry and like the actual very soft romantic version of myself, because I've never had the safety to do that.
yeah,
And I still have not experienced that yet. And hopefully I find that. I believe I will.
yeah.
Not hopefully, I will find
You
that.
will,
But
you will find that
I,
for
I
sure.
mean, I don't even know what it's like to experience that to even showcase that part of myself to somebody because I have been in my masculine for so long. So I love everything that you're saying. And I do think women, it also comes down to um, we can't control men. We can't control the way that men show up in relationships. We only can control the way that we show up. And if you are wanting certain qualities from a man, then show up like, well, first of all, if he's in his feminine and he's wanting to take from you, then just don't accept that and walk away. Because I think we're so used to like babying men at this point, and then
Yeah.
that creates its own dynamic. But you, for me, going into dating, it's like I think it's really easy to focus on men are bad, men are this, blah blah blah. There's this narrative, especially as among all women right now, where we're like basically like fuck men, and I'm like, no, I believe that there's so many good quality honest masculine men out there that are just waiting to find their connection, and I believe that, because if I don't believe it, I'm not going to find it, and
Yeah.
the only thing I can focus on is the way that I show up. And I think as women, that's all that we can focus on, is the way that we show up. And I mean, similarly to men too, but it's just, you're only in control of yourself, and trust and believe that that connection and that relationship, if that's what you desire, is out there for you.
Yeah. Pay attention to the small things.
Yes.
It's so important how someone says something. You've probably seen an example or heard of it, but as small as a man saying, you know, hey, what do you want to go and do, already in his feminine, hey, what day, maybe Friday or something. No, like a man, like if I text a woman to meet, I'm going to say, hey, I'm thinking Friday at 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up. Does that work for you? Because I'm not
Yes.
going to be so controlling, like, hey, this is it, because that's also a bad sign. And then, all of it, do research. Sometimes I'll go on a girl's page, like, what other food has she posted, so I can pick a restaurant, instead of being like, hey, what kind of food do you want to eat? I'm like, if you can't put 5 minutes into researching, or sometimes I'm in a conversation, I can't remember something said, I'll go search it so I can then
Mm-hmm.
remember. It's like, it just takes a little bit of time. But, if we're saying, hey, I'm doing this weekend, I want you to be there, or I want you to come, it would really make me happy to spend some time with you, instead of, I'm doing this if you want to go. Just the smallest things is the difference between masculine and feminine too.
And it makes such a big difference. It makes such a
Huge.
big difference. Like, to have somebody text me, be like, I'm going to go to this place if you want to be there. Then I'm like, do they want me to be there? Like if
Yeah.
somebody just says, I would love if you were there, like, I'm going to go. It makes
Yeah.
such a big difference. It is those little things, exactly as you said. And you will know, I believe, very quickly, based on these little things, where a man is at.
Yeah.
Does he, is he being direct? And is he taking charge? You know what I mean? For me, it's like, it's based on even the way that they interact via a text message, or if you guys are DMing or whatever. I'm not going to do,
Yeah.
not even going to get into that, because
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
believe a real man's going to sit in somebody's DMs for a long time, but you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think it's all very important. And I think it's been interesting for me, because I feel like for me, what I want to be is just calm. Like, I think for me to be really in my feminine is to be my most relaxed,
Yeah.
my calmest self. Like, I'm not going to be rushed everywhere I go. I'm not going to be like frantic. I'm not going to have all these schedules and routines. I'm just going to be relaxed and doing whatever I want. And I feel like, to me, when I think about what I view, even in a man, but in both men and women, like, what is the sexiest trait to me? And I'm like, that is somebody who is calm and who's relaxed. So that's what
Yeah.
I'm trying to embody, that energy, but
And
we're work in progress.
it makes you feel that way. That can make you
Exactly.
feel calm in your nervous system. And I think, unfortunately, we have to get away from the saying that, this would be just the what do they say, the bare necessities, like opening your door, things like, but they're not anymore. We have
Mhm.
to just accept that those are not anymore. Because, like, I can't tell you how many women I've dated or gone out with that have never been on a date, haven't bought flowers, have never had a man write down something that she, said that she might want, and then got as a gift, or took her to that restaurant, or opened the door for her. And it's like, it's mind blowing every time I hear that. It's like, what is going on in the world that you haven't experienced that? And but on the other side, make sure that you're not enabling that, and you're not and you're calling that out. Like, I deserve this. I'm not going to accept someone to not treat you the way that you want to be treated. And the second you're, even start seeing signs of it, you know,
Go
get
ahead.
exactly what you want.
That's what I did. I just bowed on out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something this is really small, but I'm just speaking to the women out there. Like, this is a very simple thing that I do now. I used to be somebody that I would be like, I'm walking in front, like I was somebody that would take charge. I bulldozed every man that I dated, you know what I mean? And now I'm like, I don't know how to open a door. And if the man isn't going to open the door, I simply act like I do not know how to open the
You
door.
stand there. I get so mad if I always open the door and she goes, I'll like say her name and I'll say, hey, we're not going to do that, right?
Yep.
I'm going to leave you. You can go in your feminine because quick note, I'm very into like the dominant, submissive, and sexuality. So I like to, really embody that in every part. And so using your words is important. And I don't do the same thing. I'm like, you're not going to open that door. Do not touch that door. You're not allowed to touch the door. You're not allowed to drive. I mean, if you want to drive, it's like you
Yep.
can, but you in my life, you're going to sit in the passenger seat. You're the passenger princess, unless you tell me, hey, I want to drive today.
Okay, so all the women listening, if Josh exists, I'm telling you, there are other men out there. You just have to believe it. You
Yeah.
just have to believe it because if you
Eventually, I'm
go,
gonna have courses on this.
yeah, but if you go through life being like all men suck and men like this don't exist, you aren't going to find them because that
Yeah.
is what your brain is going to be filtering through for you. So a huge shift for me when it came to dating was just deciding that really good quality men exist. And I've been, I don't do online dating or anything, and I've been making connections. So people do exist, but if you have to tell yourself that this is going to happen for you and these men out there exist for you. So
And I
everything
wasn't
comes
this
back to,
man.
hmm?
So, I really want to say that I was not this man. I was not
Yeah,
this
yeah.
version of myself. I really was. So people sometimes need time to grow. Like just because someone wasn't that way 10 years ago doesn't mean they're not now. Not that you should go back to someone necessarily, but they can change and grow into that person.
Yeah. I mean, just as we are all going through this
Right.
process too,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because
exactly.
most of us have a lot of work to do on ourselves as well. So it's two-sided. I firmly believe that. And I think,
Yeah.
like, I think it goes from both ends. It's not just that men are the devil and women just should sit back. I think it's two-sided. So
Yeah.
anyways, we'll wrap it there because we've gone all over the place. It's been a
I know.
beautiful conversation though. Josh, tell everybody where they can find you, what you're working on, plug
Yeah.
your stuff.
And you're a part of the chapter in my life where you didn't know this, but I go by Joshua.
Oh, I'm so
I
sorry.
go by
Okay.
Joshua. You didn't know that. That was one of my when I went through my healing. I was like, no, I am Joshua. So
Okay.
I go by
Joshua.
Joshua now, and the two pages you can find me are Shredded Gingy. I was not a big fan of the name, but I keep it because it was a big turning point in my life. And Micro.Bloom is the microdosing page. You'll find a Telegram link in the bio. That's where we do most of our communication. Our menu is available and ordering, and we will be there to help you any part of the way. And in any of my fitness and mindset coaching, or even life coaching, I don't market it, but I do small amounts of life coaching for select people, and relationship coaching. And combined in that, you can all contact me for that at Shredded Gingy.
All right. Well, thank you, Josh.
Thank you so much.